Hello, I'm Raafet Azzouz, founder of the MIT New Colossus project. I'm a Sloan fellow here at MIT. Before that, I was for 2 decades a Wall Street executive in quantitative finance in New York City and London. I'm Tunisian, born and raised. I studied in France, but then I worked in New York City and in London. So we started the MIT New Colossus project with a group of brilliant master graduate students here at the Institute for several reasons. First, we wanted to shine a light on the stories of extraordinary immigrant trailblazers here in America. From this conversation, we wanted to learn from their achievements and their journeys, how they overcame challenges and hurdles, how they built community, how they raised hundreds or billions of dollars in order to achieve venture success. We hope through this project to inspire the next generation of brilliant minds coming to America to achieve extraordinary impossible missions. I hope you will enjoy these conversations as much as we do, and it will resonate with you. Good morning, Wemimo.
Good morning. How you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
Not too shabby.
Not too shabby. Very good. Look, I'm very excited actually to have you here for this 4th episode of the New Colossus project at MIT, especially given your background and the success you've had with Esusu. I think it's pretty opportune and timely you're here. Just by way of background, the MIT New Colossus project is telling the stories of trailblazing immigrants here in the United States, like yourself, to teach the next generation from your successes and how you achieve that success in your endeavors, and to propagate that knowledge to the next generation. So maybe let me quickly introduce you, and afterwards we can dive into the conversation.
Sounds wonderful.
Perfect. So you are the co-founder and the CEO of Esusu. It's a fintech that was founded in 2018, which, I mean, on scale of things is actually fairly young, but you have risen pretty fast over the last few years. So the mission of Esusu is actually to unlock the financial industry for marginalized communities and further financial inclusion. It was created in 2018 with your co-founder, Samir Goel. Mm-hmm. And in 2022, you, in your Series B, you raised 144 million, if I'm correct.
130 million.
Very close. Yeah. And from actually a roster of very famous investors, being SoftBank, being Concrete Row, Serena Ventures, and a common friend of ours, Claude at Equity Alliance.
Right.
So, I mean, congratulations on being a unicorn, I guess.
Thank you.
Look, I would love to start our conversation by going back in time with you. Not Esusu, not your New York days, but I want to go back to when you came to the US. I think you were 17 years old when you came here.
Yeah.
And you came for university. I think you came to University of Minnesota with your mother. And actually, I just want to go there and ask you, what were your expectations coming here? What were your expectations of America? Was it a dream of yours to come study here? And what did it feel like in reality when you arrived here?
Right. Well, thanks a lot for that kind introduction. When I go down memory lane a little bit, just my origin story started in the slums of Lagos, Nigeria. I lost my dad at the age of 2, and I was raised by my mother and 2 very spirited sisters. My eldest sister is 13 years older than me, and then the second one is 10 years older than me. So I wasn't, the last child that, was handed everything. I was sort of like, the child that had to do everything in the house. So I grew up very fast, learning from my siblings. But one thing that was clear, growing up in the slums, was just the fact that I wasn't going to let the destitution of my social position determine my destiny. And one thing my mother fundamentally believed in was just the power of education. She afforded my school fees to one of the finest high schools in Nigeria. And that's what led me to this magical place called America. I was going to school with the ministers' kids and other dignitaries, and when they were going to Europe and the United States, I self-studied for the SATs and, applied to one of the cheapest land grants universities, which had the slogan of a small campus and a big degree. Mm-hmm. And that was the University of Minnesota. So I immigrated from 80-degree weather in Lagos to negative 22 degrees in Minnesota.
It's a big gap.
A big one. I had not seen snow at that scale. And I was always troubled about the fact that why do people live in a freezer, mm-hmm. particularly in Minnesota? But during that transition, something important happened. My mother and I, did not have a credit score. We walked into one of the biggest banks in Minneapolis to borrow money. Mm-hmm. And we were turned away and had to go borrow money from a predatory lender at over 400% interest rate. My mother sold my dad's ring. We borrowed money from church members, and that's how we got started in America. Mm. So really inspired by that experience, and having worked on Wall Street and other institutions, myself and my co-founder, Simi, started Esusu on those 3 core premises. No matter where you come from, the color of your skin and your financial identity shouldn't determine where you end up in the wealthiest nation the world has ever seen. Mm-hmm. And the vision is simple. How do we leverage data to bridge the racial wealth gap? And people always ask me, why the racial wealth gap, not just the wealth gap? My answer is simple. The rising tide lifts all boats. When people of color do well in America, immigrants, America generally outperforms and does well. Mm-hmm. So that's the premise of what we do.
It's very inspiring the way you're portraying it. And, I really believe in what you're doing. And I have a similar kind of life story, going to a similar type of high school, but immigrating to another country, not the US initially, but having the same aspirations, like the aspirations of Wall Street and building right. and social justice, mm-hmm. so on and so forth. And, it really resonates. So what I would like to, what I would like actually to talk about is, you talked about your motivation to start Esusu, and it's clear from what you're saying that it is deeply ingrained in your immigrant journey.
Right.
How do you feel, in the way you build Esusu? How did you bring that immigrant ethos into the company, into the way you have built teams, into the philosophy of the company?
So the way we've thought about building Esusu, from my background and my co-founder also was a first, second generation American, is how do we think about our vision to values, right? The vision for us is the North Star. So 100 years from now, will those things change? Mission, like what are we doing today to make the world, in our opinion, a more perfect place? And above all, our values and operating principles. Those things are how we promote, elevate, or in some cases, let people go. We wanted people to sort of live up to those values. And some of the ones that really resonate with me, for example, is compassionate inquiry. We are all stuck in our own echo chambers. We're doing different things at different times, and we have a different lens on how we look at the world. And one of the troubling things is we don't put ourselves in each other's shoes anymore. So at Esusu, with compassionate inquiry, I might see something that really upset me, but is there value in just taking a step back and asking, what was that person thinking about? Mm-hmm. What was their frame of mind when they made that decision? These things are very, very tough because as human beings, we're very reactive, mm-hmm. and it's tough to essentially get to that level of conversation. Number 2 is to be very rigorous. At Esusu, we always say we don't care about the 99% of what goes right. It's the 1% that can ruin our reputation we focus on. So quality, paying attention to detail. And the thing about quality, it's a perpetual journey. You're not quite going to get there. When you set a bar, you're always going to look to exceed it. And sometimes you fall short because things are not perfect every time. And the third thing is hard work. I'm not the smartest person in the world. Samir, my co-founder, is not the smartest person in the world. But one thing that we do have, we have a chip on our shoulder, and I don't care how smart you are, you will never outwork us. You know, I just landed right now from LAX to New York at 7 a.m. this morning. I have not slept, and I'm having this conversation with you. You will never outwork me. That's one thing I can always put my name behind. So these are some of the core pillars, particularly from an immigrant standpoint, that have molded and shaped how we look at Esusu and our incredible colleagues we have the opportunity to work alongside every day. You know, people always talk about the glories of what the founders do, but the glory actually and the praise goes to our colleagues that work tirelessly day in, day out to make Esusu what it was, what it is, and what it's going to be tomorrow.
Yeah, it makes, what you're saying makes a lot of sense, and I really respect the values that you have infused into the company. As you say, they are very molded and shaped by your history, yours and Samir's, you know, of your backgrounds and the way you grew up in life, kind of that, I wouldn't say scrappiness, but you know, that attitude to always outwork and go the extra mile and avoid that 1% of tail event that is actually going to ruin your reputation or ruin the company, because reputation is everything in the financial industry. Right. Maybe to go back on the outwork and, you know, and maybe actually on the early years of Esusu, because I know your asset raising in the first years was actually very challenging, right? I mean, way before the Series B, way before you were a unicorn, when you and Samir were like, you know, scrapping coins and trying to raise your first seed money. Can you maybe actually tell the story of how you raised the first rounds, how hard it was, and who were actually the people behind you, because you need first believers, right?
You know, when you said that Esusu was founded in 2018, I sort of chuckled and laughed. The idea of Esusu actually started in December 25th, 2015. Myself and Samir had met each other earlier on. We're in NYU together. We met at a Clinton Global Initiative conference. President Clinton usually hosts this conference where students that are entrepreneurs can come together. I was in graduate school, Samir was an undergrad at NYU, and we sort of became friends. And we thought about starting a company and doing something special that was fundamentally going to impact the communities we come from, and by doing so can have a profound impact in society. So that was, 2015. We were too broke. And, my mother never had a 401k. My mother works still today 2 jobs as a personal care aide, and earns under $75,000 or around $75,000 a year, right? And I was my mother's retirement plan. I was everything she poured ourselves into. So myself and Samir, when we had the idea, didn't necessarily have the luxury to go start immediately. We worked in corporate America. I had stints at Goldman Sachs and PricewaterhouseCoopers doing mergers and acquisition. And that was just to keep us grounded, learn the trade, and making sure that we can speak to the realities of how the world worked. And we learned a lot, and we're immensely grateful to those institutions. I think Samir worked at LinkedIn also in terms of what they've instilled in us. So fast forward 3 years later, we quit our jobs because the idea of Esusu got out, and we talked about it on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange, and our employers were like, okay, are you going to stay or are you going to leave? So we decided to take the leap of faith in 2018 and left corporate America. And the idea was originally to help people save as a collective. We're still focused on financial sort of freedom, helping people live their financial best. But the early days were really, really painful. Myself and Samir at some point were in $100,000 in credit card debt. We depleted our savings. We were going, we didn't have a paycheck. We didn't have an office. We used to go to different sort of restaurants or coffee shops to, walk out of. But one story that I will never forget, and we tell all our colleagues at Esusu, when we closed our first contract, which was at my alma mater, the University of Minnesota. It's a small school in the northwestern corner of Minnesota. And it was a $20,000 contract, but obviously we didn't get paid that day. Our credit cards were short. We couldn't afford anything. And we had this genius idea, was to go to Denny's, walk all night, eat a Grand Slam. We love Grand Slams. Denny's is still one of our favorite restaurants. And the idea was to then take a flight from Fargo, North Dakota to San Francisco to continue to go raise money. Sadly for us, we were not perpetual motion machines that could just last that long. And we started falling asleep, and the restaurant manager came and asked us respectfully to leave because his job was going to be at risk, because people try to do what we do and stay there, sleep there, and that wasn't just going to fly. So we were kicked out of a Denny's early on in this journey.
That's an achievement.
Yeah. It was pretty sad at that point. And it was cold also, so it was like sub-zero weather. But those things build character.
Yeah, of course.
And, we had this perseverance that knew no bounds. Then number two, we spoke to, over 326 investors that said no to us, that wouldn't fund us, and didn't think this idea was a revolutionary idea that could, be a big business. There were a lot of investors that said, I don't think this could be $1 billion company. I just don't believe in it. But we kept on pushing. We kept on persevering. We didn't accept mediocrity as the order of the day. We didn't let what other people were saying sort of stop us. And we raised our first round of financing, which was, our colleagues we used to work with. There's a famous colleague that I won't mention his name, not to embarrass him, but one day when Esusu continues to grow, the person will be mentioned. There was an investor that took a bet on us, that borrowed money to invest in the company, and there was another investor that put their mortgage on an hold just to take a chance on us. And those are the people we wake up day in and day out to make sure this company can fulfill what it's positioned to do. Do well and do good, and show that when you happen to invest in folks that look like me, we will outperform and hopefully create businesses that will make the world a more perfect place.
It's important to have these early believers, the one who are ready to take that money out of their mortgage, to borrow money to invest in you. Who would you say were your, because mentors and your community, especially in early stage, are pretty crucial, not just from a monetary standpoint, but also from a guidance standpoint, an advice standpoint. Who would you say were your close circle when you started that were crucial to your early innings, the early successes of Esusu? I mean, of Wemimo a few years ago. This was like just 6 years ago.
Yeah. Feels like 6 years, but
I know, it feels like 20.
Feels like 30 decades.
And I said 6 years, and I saw you, I was like, okay.
Yeah. When we started Esusu, I used to have I used to have beard, and now, I'm bald.
I have extra beard before.
One of the things that Esusu stands for is this concept of forward together. And it's really rooted in, if you want to go fast, you go alone. But if you want to go far, you go together. We stand on the shoulders of so many people that have invested emotionally, through advice, to make this company what it is today. Some of the people that stand out to me, people like Sean Mendy at Westbound Capital, incredible human being. Met Sean and the Westbound Capital team, Ian, Will, Denai, and the rest of the team at the very, very early innings of Esusu. They didn't even have a fund at that point, and we just stayed in touch, and they've been able to open up their network to us to get the company to where it is today. I can also think about people like Jeff Weiner, the former CEO of LinkedIn, really grounded us in this idea of vision to values. If you don't set your vision, you don't set your mission, and you don't have values, and you don't have a plan, other people will come into the company and define those for you. You don't have a framework on how people should behave. So we're immensely grateful to folks like Jeff and Brian at NextPlay that have played a crucial role. There's also someone that sits on our board, Olin Douglas, at a very, very early stage. He's just been a strong advocate. He has a wealth of experience and just been guiding us. Those are just a few people, but there are many, many more that we stand on their shoulders that have played a quintessential role in this company's evolution. And if I start listing them all, we're going to be here for hours.
Look, it's good to recognize that you're standing on the shoulders of these people who were here when actually 326 others said no.
Exactly.
I think that's the important thing today.
Exactly.
A few years after.
Exactly.
So, now you are in a different position, but still early innings for Esusu. You have a big mission, you have big goals. You raise your Series B, reach unicorn level. It's a massive success, but in a way it also requires massive, I would imagine, massive change into a company.
Right.
In strategy, in people, in direction. How have you, from that moment on, which is from 2022 to now, how and forward, what has that unlocked for you as a leader of the company, and Samir as well?
Yeah. To answer that question, I'll just keep us grounded, because I don't think we talked about it at length on sort of the world Esusu wants to see. In America, there are 45 million people that either don't have a credit score or have what we call a thin file. Of those, on an average, 76% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck. The average debt in America is around $92,000, give or take. If you do the math, 45 million times $92,000, that is roughly $4.1 trillion we're leaving on the table because people can't get access to capital. Let's say, law of large numbers, people get half of that, fine. $2.2 trillion. When you have $2.2 trillion in liquidity, there's a lot of things that can happen. Right? People can have access to a mortgage, which means there'll be property taxes paid. People can have access to auto loans so they can drive their kids to school. And that's what we really latched on at Esusu. We said, how can we make sure when people do everyday things, they can get credit for it? Rent is the largest monthly expense for low to medium income people. But when we started this company, less than 10% of data showed up on their credit score. So we created this simple paradigm where that data could be reflected and they get credit for it. And that's what has propelled our growth. You pay your rent, it shows up on your credit score. Your credit score, gets some kind of improvement so you can get quality financial products. If you have a poor credit score, it can cost you over $250,000 in interest over your lifetime. That is ludicrous.
Enormous.
Right? It's like we're treating people like they're guilty until proven innocent. And that's backwards. And we ought to do better. And that's what we set out to do. And the whole idea is simple. How do you take people on this navigation journey? Financial identity, when people are invisible in the economy. financial stability, giving them necessary resources to be where they are, and then financial wealth, making sure they can build wealth because wealth begat wealth, and they can pass it to the future generation. So that's the core three-legged stool and journey that Esusu stands on, and that's what we've been utterly focused on since day one. So now let's talk about the growth trajectory. Now Esusu is a leading player when it comes to reporting rental data. We work with a lot of the biggest owners and operators in the country. And when I think about the vision of what we're trying to accomplish, is how do we make sure people have more wealth? And, you know, in this case, what we've been able to do, the math is unequivocal. You know, when we looked at people we've reported rental data for on an aggregated basis, what have they gone on to do with that credit score? Last year, we published numbers that we've been able to unlock $22 billion in credit activities for folks. $14 billion of that is mortgages. These are people that otherwise would have been left behind. These are people that otherwise would have been overlooked. These are people that otherwise would have been kicked out of a bank like my mother and I. Well, you know what we do at Esusu? We see them. We said, you know what? You're bigger than what your credit score is. But how can we integrate you in the American economy, in the American financial system? And if there's anything I'm most proud of, it's just us being able to do that and give people the credit where credit is due and help them build wealth.
Yeah, it's I really like the mission that you are going for, especially after this last fundraise. I think it is quite important. Again, you know, I go back to even our early part of our conversation, and I think about you and your mother coming here, and the fact that you were not seen, you know, as to get a loan at a traditional bank, and that how this is now your mission to actually allow others to be seen from that standpoint, from that financial inclusion standpoint, that financial wellness standpoint. I think it's quite important and pretty remarkable.
Thank you.
No, I mean it's well done. One thing I actually, and here I want to maybe change a bit gears, is Esusu comes from Yoruba, right?
Yes.
And I mean, I feel you're deeply rooted in your Nigerian roots, right? And one of the things that I have witnessed, and many have witnessed, is when you come to a new country, right? I mean, I went to France and I went to England and I came here, right? You came to the US. You tend to, you know, many or a few, I would say, tend to erase their origin and kind of the difference, right? But you're clearly affirming it, right? How do you balance, you know, your Nigerian identity, your American identity to actually propel you forward, right? In Esusu, in your everyday, it's more of a personal question. I was just curious about this.
You know, I always say I'm a cacophony of things and we're always evolving. And there's a quote that I really, really admire, which is, the only way to be free in an unfree world is to be so unapologetically free that your mere existence is a threat to mediocrity. I am who I am. I can't change who I am. I am a very, very layered person. I am a Yoruba man from the southwest region of Nigeria. I'm also Nigerian, West African. And then when I think about my migration to the United States, I evolved to become a black man. Because guess what? If a cop is pulling me over, they're not going to say, oh, you're Nigerian or you're Yoruba. Like, in this context, I'm a black person, right? So I think one's identity is layered and it's ever evolving. And you need to be very, very comfortable with that reality. But you shouldn't forego a piece of yourself for anything. It's not worth it, because then you diminish who you are as a human being. Mm-hmm. And so for me, it's just, I understand the fact that, you know, when I'm in Nigeria, I hang out and speak Yoruba with my friends. And when I'm in the south side of Chicago, I am in LA, or I'm in Bronx or New York, right? I can still represent, mm-hmm. because it's just ever evolving. And I don't think you need to be jingoistic about a particular identity. You need to be fluid. Mm-hmm. I think that's one of the advantages immigrants have. You have the opportunity to just start over and over and over again, right? You're in Nigeria, you had a way of doing things in Nigeria. 17 years later, boom, Minnesota, start a new identity. You're like, I'm gonna go deer hunt, ice fish, expand your intellectual frame of reference. And then boom, you're in New York City. Wow, it's chaotic, reminds me of Lagos. Everything is tiny, everything is loud. And the next thing you know, you're in Los Angeles and you're in different parts of the world. So I think that's one of the unique sources of being an immigrant no one talks about. You have the opportunity to just click reset. Mm-hmm. And when you click reset, you learn from hindsight. You learn from, well, you know, I did this stuff back then, I want to change this. But our identities are very layered, are very complex, but it is a cacophony of things, and you have to let things come out mm-hmm. Naturally when they come out. You know, when I came to this country, people used to say, your accent is so thick, I can't understand it. I can't help you. I am who I am. You know, I'm not going to assimilate. I will get there one day so you can understand me, but if you can't understand me, that's your cup of tea. You would have to just deal with it and mm-hmm. navigate the complexity of a multi-layered society. Mm-hmm. So I think my immigrant journey is an opportunity to reset, and it's a unique advantage. But I think in being an immigrant, it's also important to pay homage mm-hmm. to folks that we stand on their shoulders, right? You know, in Nigeria, I stand on the shoulders of so many freedom fighters, like Obafemi Awolowo, Fela Anikulapo Kuti. When I come to the United States, you know, you stand on the shoulders of so many that have been there before. You know, Coretta Scott King, Martin Luther King, you know, Thurgood Marshall, Rosa Parks, a bunch of folks that have laid the foundation to make this country what it is today. So I always try as much as possible to educate myself on the history, because if you don't educate yourself, history rhymes, and you'll make the same mistakes.
History does rhyme sometimes, and I really like your approach of seeing it as a multifaceted and actually embracing all the pieces of it. Yeah. And I think it was an Oscar Wilde quote, right? Yeah. I really like that quote. I think it's very...
Oh, it's a Mark Twain quote.
Mark Twain. Oscar Wilde. Yeah. Mark Twain. You know, same period. I'm sure they were best friends.
Yeah. Hopefully.
Mark Twain.
Yeah. You know, history doesn't necessarily repeat itself by rhymes.
Yeah. Actually, and you know what I'm curious about, and it's more like we're drawing to the end mm-hmm. of this conversation, which I enjoyed very much, mm-hmm. and I think this is going to be very insightful. Mm-hmm. I mean, if you actually look back, right? Now, we started by, look back to your younger self. Mm-hmm. And now you see young Wemimo mm-hmm. arriving at 17 years old, doing that, I don't know how many degrees of temperature spread and difference, right?
Yeah.
I mean, what would you tell him to do? What would be your advice to him if he was going to come to the US and start university and dream big and do big things? What would be your advice to him today?
Wow. So let me go down memory lane and just reflect a little bit on coming on the plane with a three-piece suit and no jacket. My advice is fivefold, and I'll tell them in stories. Number one is to fall forward. Like I said, I grew up in the slums of Nigeria. No one thought I would ever be at this position. So I live my life in a way whereby I have nothing to lose. I don't have anything to fall back on. I don't have a dad that expects me to be a surgeon. I remember I brought my mom to 200 West when I was in corporate America, and she's like, "Oh my God, this is incredible, we made it," you know? And I told her, like, I'm gonna quit, and Simi and I are gonna start Esusu, and she's like, "Oh God, I thought we made it," and she was all emotional. Well, just fall forward. This life is so short. You do not want to be on your deathbed and have to ask yourself, what if I did that thing? You know? So, and it relates to my second point. Move away from your comfort zone and explore your stretch zone. It is easy to be in corporate America, to make money and climb the ladder. And you know what? People do that, and some people, that's what they should be doing. But if you have that idea that you think could fundamentally impact the world, why not try? The only thing guaranteed in this construct called Earth is we're going to die, at least, and this proverbial thing would expire one day. Do you want to ask yourself, what if, on your deathbed? No. Like, just go for it. Take chances. The third thing I would say is perseverance. Smia and I had a lot of rejections. There were really dark days on this journey whereby we didn't have any money. People didn't believe in us. And those things hurt. It hurts your soul. You feel like, why can't people just see something special? But you got to keep going. You got to persevere. You fall down, pick yourself back up, believe in yourself. And failure isn't fatal. You keep learning and you keep evolving. So if you have that business idea, give it a shot. You know, if you have that idea to invest in something you believe in, give it a shot. If you want to run for political office, do it. Because we all owe it to society to make this world a more perfect place. And number 4 is you need to surround yourself with very good people. People are the most important assets, regardless of what you do. Either you're working a traditional job or you're starting a company, you need to make sure you surround yourself with the best people that will propel you to the next phase. And the last thing for me, which is very unconventional, is I'm a person of faith. I think unwavering faith is really, really crucial. My story is not possible. It's one of those outlier stories. It's one of those infinitesimal cases. And I believe it's because of my faith. My faith knows no bounds. My faith is that smaller than that of a mustard seed. And I believe because of that, I am the embodiment of so many infinite possibilities. I grew up in the slums of Lagos, Nigeria, moved to Minnesota, came to New York City, and partnered with another immigrant kid with a funny name from Schenectady, New York, via Delhi, India. And those 2 misfits created a $1 billion company that is impacting millions of lives across this country. In my opinion, if that's not faith, I don't know what it is. But that's also the true genius of America. That if you work hard, you play by the rules, you contribute your humble quota to society, regardless of where you come from, regardless of what you look like, even if you're an immigrant, you can make it in this society. And you can contribute your own humble quota to make it more perfect. And that's what we do every day, every time. So those 5 things is really summed up in one simple quote: be caught trying. Whatever you do, just be caught trying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it sounds, all what you're saying is really resonates, and I think you have been thinking about this and kind of distilling it for many years as well, and you're very clear about what it means for you and how you have been developing your philosophy, Esusu's philosophy, but also the future of the company and yourself. I think this risk-taking and this faith as well as this kind of concept of mortality, that we are all, the only certainty is we're going to die.
Yes.
That's the only certain
That's the only thing.
That's the only thing.
Only guarantee.
It's the only guarantee. So might as well.
Why not?
Why not?
What do you have to lose? Do you want to be on your deathbed, or when you breathe last and say, oh, what if I try that thing?
Yeah.
Don't live with regrets. Just
Yeah.
carry on, push.
I like that. Wemimo, this was a pleasure.
Thank you.
To have you and to have this conversation together. It was very insightful, and I mean, I can relate with a lot of it personally, given my own background as well. You know, also, I've done a longer stint on Wall Street, but there's a lot of great things you have been saying, and I want to thank you for this time, for telling the story for the people who are going to view this video and this podcast, and yeah, look, thank you.
You got it. Thank you so much. This is great, and let's continue to push the envelope.
Thank you.